"He's broke, unstable, and dangerous," my wife told the judge, demanding full custody. I said nothing. Then my 16-year-old son stood up. "Your Honor, please watch this." The video showed my wife's boyfriend bragging that he'd already drained 3 women dry and that my hidden $4.8 million was next. Then my wife's voice came through the recording. "Once the divorce is signed, we take everything." The judge froze. The bailiff locked the courtroom doors. Then my son whispered, "Dad, there's one more video." But this story doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts in a watch shop. My wife told a judge I was a senile, dangerous old man who had no business raising his own son. And for a moment, sitting at that defendant's table with my hands folded over knuckles still stained with brass polish, I watched the courtroom believe her. Lorraine Holbrook, 48, stood beside her attorney with her designer coat buttoned to the throat and her jaw set like a woman who had already rehearsed the victory speech. She was my wife of 17 years, the mother of my son, and she was describing me to a stranger in a black robe as though I were something she had found rotting in the basement. "This man cannot be trusted with the safety of a 16-year-old boy," her lawyer said, gesturing toward me without looking at me. "He is 65 years old, Your Honor. He is confused, he is financially reckless, and he presents a clear and present danger to a minor child." I did not move. I did not blink. Boy Farrell, 58. The family law attorney seated beside me wore the same gray suit he brought to every hearing and never raised his voice above conversational. His pen had been scratching notes since the hearing began. It stopped now. That was a bad sign. Boyd only stopped writing when the argument on the other side was landing. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever sat in a room full of strangers while someone you loved described you as a monster? Not a stranger, not an enemy. The woman who slept beside you for 17 years, who knew how you took your coffee, who watched you teach your son to ride a bicycle in the driveway of the house you paid for. That woman, standing 12 feet away, turning your life into a weapon against you. I am Cedric Holbrook, 65 years old, a watchmaker by trade. My hands carry the faint scent of machine oil that no amount of soap has ever fully removed, and I have spent my adult life in a small shop in Old Town Scottsdale. Fix mechanisms that most people would throw away. I am not senile. I am not dangerous. But on that afternoon in late May, inside Maricopa County Superior Court, none of that mattered. What mattered was the man sitting 10 feet behind Lorraine's counsel. Vance Ellsworth, 46, had positioned himself in the first row with the ease of someone who had done this before. Tailored shirt open at the collar, a salesman's easy smile that never quite reached his eyes. He sat behind my wife's legal team as though the courtroom already belonged to him. And when the judge nodded along with opposing counsel's argument about my mental fitness, Vance's smile widened by exactly 1 degree. I could see the ruling forming behind the judge's eyes, the way I could see a cracked mainspring before I even opened the case. Then a voice cut through from the gallery. "Please wait." Every head turned. Mine turned last. Because I already knew the voice. I just could not believe he was here. Kieran Holbrook, 16, lean and quiet, with my watchful eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, rose from the gallery bench. He was clutching a tablet to his chest, the way a younger child might hold a stuffed animal, except there was nothing childish about the look on his face. He had not been allowed to see me in weeks. I did not know he would be in that courtroom. I did not know what he was holding. "May I show you something my dad doesn't even know about?" "Your Honor," he said. The bailiff stepped forward. The judge raised a hand to stop him. Lorraine's composure cracked. "Not much, just a fracture along the jaw, a flicker behind the eyes." But I had spent 45 years reading the tension in small, precise things, and I saw it. She did not know what was on that tablet either. My 16-year-old son had just done something I never asked him to do, and the courtroom was holding its breath. "I will allow it," the judge said, "but if this is theatrics, young man, I will hold your father in contempt." Kieran walked forward. The bailiff took the tablet and connected it to the courtroom screen. Boyd leaned toward me and whispered, "Did you know about this?" I shook my head. "For the first time in 2 months." Boyd Farrell looked uncertain, and that frightened me more than anything Lorraine had said. The screen flickered on. But to understand what played on that screen and why it destroyed my wife's entire case in under 3 minutes, you need to know how a 65-year-old watchmaker ended up sitting in that chair. With nothing but a motel key in his pocket, a son he had not been allowed to see in weeks, and a $22 million secret he had kept for 45 years. It started with the smell of brass polish and a shop bell that had not stopped ringing since 1981. The shop smelled the way it always did. Boss polish, machine oil, and 45 years of patience soaked into the wooden countertops until the scent became indistinguishable from the walls themselves. I opened every morning at 7. Had done so since 1981 when I signed a lease on a narrow storefront in Old Town Scottsdale with money I earned repairing clocks in my father's garage. The sign above the door still read Holbrook Timepieces in gold leaf. I repainted every 3rd spring. By 3:30 each afternoon, Kieran would push through that door with his backpack slung over one shoulder, drop into the stool beside my bench, and watch me work. He never asked to be taught. He just watched, and eventually his hands started mimicking mine, tweezers angled the same way, loop pressed to the same eye. He understood something most people never learn, that precision is not speed. It is the decision to care about the thing no one else can see. One afternoon, he set down a pair of needle-nose pliers and looked at me. "Why do you still fix other people's watches when you could buy the whole block?" he asked. I did not look up from the movement I was cleaning. Because a man who stops working with his hands starts lying to himself about who he is. He nodded like that made sense. It did. If you understood the rest, you might wonder why a man worth $22 million would choose to live above a watch shop in a town where nobody locked their doors. The answer is simple. In 1981, I designed a safe lock mechanism in my garage, a better tumbler sequence, self-resetting, nearly impossible to pick. I patented it, licensed it to a manufacturer in the 90s, and watched the royalties compound inside a blind trust that no accountant, no spouse, and no lawyer had ever been told about. $22 million sat in an account no one knew about, and that was exactly how I needed it to stay. I was not hiding the money out of greed. I was hiding it out of experience. My father had a modest inheritance that became public knowledge in our small town, and within 2 years he had lost half of it to relatives he barely knew and business partners who appeared like weather. I watched that happen at 14 and made myself a promise. If I ever built something worth protecting, I would protect it by making sure no one knew it existed. So, I fixed watches. I lived above the shop. I drove a 12-year-old truck. And I kept the most important number in my life locked inside a trust that would only open for Kieran when the time was right. That was early April. Lorraine came home later each evening that week. I noticed the way I notice a hairspring losing tension, not all at once, but in the accumulation of small deviations. An unfamiliar perfume on her collar. Phone calls she took in the laundry room with the door closed. A bank envelope tucked into the inside pocket of her coat, which I saw but did not open, because I still believed that trust was something you gave before you verified. By mid-April, the ticking had stopped entirely. I came home on a Tuesday afternoon from the shop. The azaleas along the front walk were blooming the way they always did in spring. Absurdly cheerful, indifferent to what was waiting on the porch. 2 duffel bags sat on the welcome mat. My duffel bags. packed with clothes I recognized and toiletries arranged with the efficiency of someone who had planned this while I was at work. The locks on my own front door had been changed while I was cleaning someone else's antique clock. I stood there with my keys in my hand, trying each one twice, as though the problem were mechanical and not deliberate. Then, a man in a polo shirt stepped around the corner of the house holding a manila envelope. "You've been served, sir," he said, and pressed the envelope into my chest before I could respond. I opened it on my own porch. Divorce petition, filed by Lorraine Holbrook. The language inside was surgical, senile, financially reckless, a danger to the minor child. Unfit to parent, every word chosen to build a cage around a man who had never raised his voice in his own home. I had repaired thousands of broken machines in my life, but I had never been the one thrown out like a part that no longer fit. I looked up at the bedroom window. The curtain moved. She was watching. I folded the papers, put them in my jacket pocket, picked up both duffel bags, and walked to my truck without looking back. But the worst part was not what she had written in those papers. It was what I would find the next morning when I opened my laptop in a $39 motel room and saw what she had done to every account with my name on it. The next morning came with a knock that did not wait for me to answer. I had slept 3 hours at the Desert Rose Motor Lodge in Mesa, $39 a night. The wallpaper was peeling above the bathroom mirror, and the air conditioner rattled like a dying compressor. I was still wearing yesterday's clothes when I opened the door to 2 Maricopa County officers, standing shoulder to shoulder in the early light. The taller one held a folded document. "Mr. Holbrook, you are ordered to maintain a distance of 500 feet from the residence at 4716 Arcadia Drive and all named parties, including the minor child," he said. He did not read it with malice. He read it the way a man reads something he has read 100 times before. That made it worse. I signed where they pointed. They left. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding a court order that told me I could not go to my own home, could not see my own son, could not contact the woman who had made all of this happen. An emergency restraining order, filed the same afternoon she changed the locks. The preliminary hearing at the courthouse 2 hours later lasted 11 minutes. A judge I had never met reviewed Lorraine's affidavit, nodded twice, and made the order official. I stood at the respondent's table with no attorney because I had not had time to find one. The judge told me I could contest at a full hearing in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. My son was 16 years old and trapped in a house with a woman who had just lied to a judge under oath, and I was supposed to wait 3 weeks. Have you ever watched your entire life disappear in the time it takes to load a web page? I drove back to the motel, opened my laptop on the nightstand, and logged into the joint checking account to transfer enough money for a retainer. The balance read 0. I opened the savings account. 0. The money market. 0. Every joint account Lorraine had access to had been drained to the last cent, sometime between Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning. I understood now that the bank envelope I had seen in her coat pocket weeks ago was not a statement. It was a withdrawal authorization. She had not just locked me out of the house, she had locked me out of my own life. I closed the laptop and sat in that motel room for a long time. I had built 45 years of discipline around the principle that patience solves what force cannot. But patience requires a floor to stand on, and mine had just been pulled out. The trust was untouched. She did not know about it. Nobody did. But I could not access it without triggering questions I was not ready to answer, not yet. Not while the restraining order was fresh and every move I made would be scrutinized. By afternoon, patience won. I drove to Arcadia, not to the house. I was not foolish enough to violate the order within hours of signing it. I parked 3 blocks east, where I had a clear line of sight to my own driveway. I told myself I was checking on the property. That was a lie. I was checking on my son. What I saw instead was a leased silver sedan pulling into the driveway at 4:17 in the afternoon. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out carrying 2 large suitcases, tall, mid-40s, with the easy posture of someone who had walked into other people's homes before. Lorraine came out the front door. She crossed the lawn and kissed him. Not quickly, not discreetly. She kissed him on my lawn, in front of my neighbors, 3 hours after a judge told me I was too dangerous to stand on my own porch. Remember this moment, because what I did not know about the man carrying those suitcases would have changed everything I did next. I did not get out of the truck. I did not shout. I reached into the glove box, pulled out a small notebook I kept for recording watch serial numbers, and wrote down everything. License plate number, make and model of the sedan, the exact time he walked through my front door. She had found the accounts she had access to and emptied them. But what she did not know, what neither of them could have imagined, was that the quiet old watchmaker parked 3 blocks away had 22 million reasons to be patient. The next morning, I drove to Tempe with the license plate number in my pocket. I needed a lawyer. The money would come from the trust, one small withdrawal, carefully placed, no trail leading back to the full amount. Boyd Farrell's office sat on the 2nd floor of a stucco building near Mill Avenue. He was 58, a family law attorney who had spent 3 decades in Maricopa County courtrooms and never raised his voice above conversational. He opened my case file, read through the restraining order and the divorce petition in silence, then set both documents down and looked at me the way a mechanic looks at an engine that has been deliberately sabotaged. "She mortgaged the house 7 months ago," he said. I did not move. "Second mortgage, taken out last September. Used the funds to cover personal debts, credit cards, store accounts, a lifestyle your watch shop income never supported." He turned a printed statement toward me. "That was before any boyfriend entered the picture, Mr. Holbrook. This is not about love. It is about money she already owed." 7 months. She had been dismantling our life while I was still calibrating her anniversary watch. How do you fight someone who started the war 7 months before you even knew there was a battle? "That restraining order is not about your safety or hers," Boyd said. "It is a tactical strike designed to keep you blind, broke, and silent until this is over." He said it without anger. Boyd Farrell was not the kind of lawyer who performed outrage. I told him about the drained accounts. He nodded as though he expected it. I told him about the man with the suitcases. He wrote down the license plate number. I did not tell him about the trust, not yet. That was the one gear in the machine that nobody else could see. Boyd took the case on a reduced retainer with the rest deferred. The first step was contesting the restraining order at the full hearing. The second was demanding financial disclosure. He shook my hand at the door. "You are calmer than most people who sit in that chair," he said. "That is going to help you." I walked back to Old Town Scottsdale that afternoon because the truck needed gas I could not afford. My shop was closed. The gold leaf letters on the window looked the same as always, and that felt like a cruelty. Everything unchanged outside, while the inside had been gutted. I saw Murray Prescott from half a block away, 68 years old, a retired antique clock dealer who had brought his pocket watches to my bench for 20 years. He was walking toward me on the same sidewalk, close enough that I could see the recognition in his eyes. He hesitated. Then he crossed the street and kept walking without a word. 20 years of coffee and conversation, and he crossed the street like I was a stranger who owed him money. I stood on that sidewalk and watched him go. Lorraine's accusations had reached the neighborhood before I could, and a lie planted in the right soil grows faster than any truth ever could. I walked back to the motel alone. Home gone, money gone, friends gone, son locked behind a court order. But at 2 in the morning, a sound broke through the silence of that motel room. A buzzing I had not heard in months coming from a prepaid phone I kept in the bottom of my duffel bag. A device only one other person in the world knew existed. I grabbed the phone before the second buzz. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from hearing my son's voice for the first time since the locks changed. "Dad," Kieran whispered. "Can you hear me?" I pressed the phone so hard against my ear that the plastic creaked. The motel room was dark. The parking lot outside was empty. The only sound in the world was my boy, whispering from inside a closet in a house I was legally forbidden to approach. "I hear you," I said. "Are you safe?" "I'm fine. She took my phone the first night, but I had the backup in my gym bag like we planned." A pause. "Dad? He is sleeping in your room, using your dresser. Mom moved your stuff into garbage bags in the garage the same day you left." His voice was steady, but I could hear the effort that steadiness cost him. "She laughs different around him, like she is performing." "What else?" I asked. "They were at the kitchen table tonight, going through papers. I heard him say they need to move fast before you find a lawyer." Another pause. "He said the word transfer 3 times. I counted." I sat on the edge of the motel bed and let that sink in. They were not just living in my house. They were accelerating whatever plan they had built, racing to finish before Boyd could file the first motion. "Kieran, listen to me. I need you to be careful. Do not let them know you are watching. Do not change anything about your routine." "I know, Dad." "I mean it. Go to school, come home, be normal. Do not give her a reason to—" "Dad?" His voice cut through mine with a clarity that stopped me cold. "I want to help, not just listen. I want to watch and record what I can. I already know where they leave documents. I know when they talk freely. It is after 10, when they think I am asleep." What kind of father asks his 16-year-old son to become a spy inside his own home? I did not ask him. That is the thing that still keeps me up at night. He volunteered. He had already mapped their patterns, already thought 3 steps ahead the way I taught him to think when diagnosing a broken movement. Watch the mechanism. Find the flaw. Do not touch anything until you understand what is broken. "You taught me," he said. "I can do this." "You are 16, I said. "This is not a watch." "Don't force the gear," he said quietly. "Let it show you where it's broken. Your words. Dad, let me use them." I wanted to say no. Every instinct in my body screamed to say no. But Boyd had already told me that the legal process would take weeks, and Kieran had just told me they were not planning to wait weeks. They were moving now, tonight. At my kitchen table. "Nothing dangerous," I said. "Nothing confrontational. You watch, you listen, you write down what you hear and when you heard it. Dates, times, exact words. Like a repair log." "Like a repair log," he repeated. "And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call this number and you get out of that house. You walk to the neighbors and you call me. Promise me." "I promise." We hung up at 3 in the morning. My son was still behind enemy lines, but for the first time since the locks changed, I was not fighting blind. The next morning, I did something I had never done in 65 years of living below my means. I put on a clean shirt, drove to a fiduciary trust office in Scottsdale, sat down across from a woman in a glass-walled office, and asked to release $250,000. The receptionist at the fiduciary trust office in Scottsdale looked at my work boots, my faded flannel, and the brass-polished stain on my left cuff. She asked if I had an appointment. I told her I was there to withdraw $250,000. She blinked twice, then picked up her phone. The trust manager appeared within 4 minutes. A clean office, glass walls, a desk with nothing on it except a monitor and a single pen. He pulled up the account, verified my identification, and nodded without surprise. The account had been compounding quietly since the 90s, fed by royalty payments from a patent I filed before most of his staff were born. He confirmed the balance, processed the disbursement authorization, and asked how I wanted the funds routed. I gave him Boyd Farrell's client trust account for the retainer, a separate operating account I had opened that morning at a credit union Boyd recommended. and instructions for the remainder. Clean, traceable, legal. Every dollar accounted for, because the last thing I needed was for a judge to question where a supposedly broke watchmaker found this kind of money. The trust manager shook my hand. "Mr. Holbrook, the account is in excellent standing," he said. "Let us know if you need anything further." I walked out into the Scottsdale sun, holding a receipt for more money than most people see in a decade. And I was still checking into a motel with a vending machine for dinner. But that was exactly the point. The money had never been about living large. It was about having something in reserve when the mechanism finally broke, and the mechanism broken. Hiring an investigator felt like winding a mainspring, one careful turn at a time, because too much pressure and the whole thing shatters. Boyd connected me with a forensic specialist who worked financial fraud cases across the Southwest. I called him that afternoon from the motel parking lot. His first question changed the shape of everything. "Mr. Holbrook, do you know anything about this man beyond the name he gave your wife?" I told him what I had: a license plate, a leased silver sedan, mid-40s, tailored shirts, the easy confidence of a man who had done this before. The investigator took it all down and said he would start with the vehicle registration and work outward. "People who use names casually," he said, "usually have more than one." That sentence sat in my chest like a stone for the rest of the day. I called Boyd and authorized the retainer, authorized the investigator's fees, and set aside a reserve for whatever came next. For the first time since the locks changed, I had resources that moved quietly, invisible until the moment they engaged. That night, Kieran called at 11. He had tried something new, an old tablet with a voice recording app, positioned on the floor of his closet, near the hallway vent that connected to the kitchen below. He had waited until Lorraine and Vance settled into their nightly routine and pressed record. The audio came back muffled, garbled, voices buried under the hum of the air conditioning. He had captured 40 minutes of sound that told us almost nothing. "I got nothing clean," he texted. "Just noise. I am sorry, Dad." I typed back carefully. "Don't apologize. Save everything, even the failures. A good watchmaker never throws out a part until he is sure it does not fit somewhere else." He saved the file, recorded it with a homework assignment name, and tucked it into a hidden folder on the tablet, 40 minutes of white noise that any reasonable person would have deleted. That muffled, garbled, seemingly useless recording would turn out to be the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case. But neither of us knew that yet. Kieran did not give up. He adjusted the tablet position, tested different times, experimented with the vent angles, the way I had taught him to experiment with escapement adjustments. He was not reckless, he was methodical, and that terrified me more than recklessness would have. "Before we hung up," he said, "same time tomorrow." Same time tomorrow. My son had the discipline to save what looked like nothing. Somewhere inside my house, behind doors I was legally forbidden to open, Lorraine and her partner were planning the next phase of their scheme. They did not know the walls had started listening. Kieran's text came at 11 at night, 3 words that turned my stomach. "They're planning something." I called him back on the prepaid. He answered on the first ring. "Vance was talking about the house," Kieran said. "He told Mom to push the sale fast, get it listed before the next hearing. He said they could reclassify her debts as marital, make it look like both of you owed the money, and force the sale to cover it." I sat on the motel bed and let the math run through my head. If they reframed the debt as joint marital debt, a judge could order the house sold to satisfy it. And once the house was liquidated, the equity would disappear into a structure controlled by a man I did not know. "There's more," Kieran said. Right before they went upstairs, Vance said just need the old man to sign one paper, and it's done. One paper, 45 years of work, and they had reduced it to one signature on a document I had not even seen yet. I told Kieran to write down everything, exact words, Exact times, he said he already had. I told him I loved him. He said he knew. We hung up. The next morning, I called Boyd and relayed every detail. He listened without interrupting, then told me to come in, not tomorrow, now. I drove to Tempe. Boyd's office had changed since my first visit. The clean desk now held 4 folders, a laptop open to a spreadsheet, and a printed report stapled in the corner. The investigator had delivered his preliminary findings overnight. "Sit down," Boyd said. He did not offer coffee. That meant the news was the kind that needed to land on solid ground. He opened the first folder. The financial consultant license Vance Ellsworth carries is registered to a firm called Pinnacle Advisory Group. That firm dissolved in 2019. He is practicing under credentials that do not exist. His Social Security number traces to a deceased individual in Portland, Oregon, died 2016. The number was reactivated through a clerical exploit the investigator has seen before in identity fraud cases. Every counterfeit watch I had ever opened had one thing in common. The movement looked right until you checked the serial numbers, and then the whole thing fell apart. "There is more," Boyd said. He turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a timeline. 8 years of records, tax filings, credit applications, lease agreements, all beginning in 2018. Before that, nothing. No school records, no employment history, no driver's license renewals, no medical claims. "This man," Boyd said, "if that is even his name, did not exist before 8 years ago." I stared at the screen. The timeline started in 2018 like a light switching on. Before that date, Vance Ellsworth was a blank page, no childhood, no 20s, no career. Just 8 years of carefully constructed documentation that looked real until someone with the right tools pulled at the edges. "Who is he?" I asked. Boyd closed the laptop. "That is what the investigator is working on now. He has flagged irregularities in 3 other states. The pattern suggests this is not the first time this scheme has been run." 3 other states, I repeated. 3 other states, possibly 3 other women. Boyd leaned back in his chair. "The investigator wants another week. He does not want to pull the thread until he knows what unravels." I drove back to the motel and thought about the man living in my house. Not about what he had done, I was beginning to understand that, but about what he was. A construction, built from dead men's numbers and dissolved companies, and the kind of confidence that only works when nobody checks the serial number. I was locking the shop for the night when I saw him standing on the sidewalk, the same man who had crossed the street to avoid me 2 weeks ago. Murray Prescott stood under the awning of the gallery next door, his hands in his jacket pockets, the look of a man who had been rehearsing something for days. I did not say anything. I finished turning the deadbolt and waited. "I should have come sooner," Murray said. He stood where he was as though the 6 feet of sidewalk were a confession booth. I believed her, and I am ashamed of that. I put the keys in my pocket. "What changed?" He looked down at his shoes. Murray was 68, a retired antique clock dealer who had spent 2 decades sitting in the chair by my shop window. He knew the difference between genuine and counterfeit as well as anyone I had ever met. "That man," Murray said. "The one living in your house. I saw him at a trade show in Albuquerque, maybe 2 years back, working a booth selling estate jewelry. They called him Daniel something. Not Vance, I am sure of it." "Daniel," I repeated. I remember because I almost bought a pocket watch from him and the hallmarks were wrong. I told the show organizer and the booth was gone the next morning. Murray finally looked up. "When I saw him on your lawn last week with her, I knew it was the same man. Same walk, same smile, different name. 20 years of friendship, and it took a stranger's fake name to bring him back to my door." I invited Murray inside. I told him what I could, not everything. Not the trust, not Kieran's surveillance, but enough. The fabricated credentials. The identity that began 8 years ago and led nowhere before that. the pattern that extended across state lines. Murray listened quietly. When I finished, he sat for a long time with his hands folded on the counter. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need you to write down everything you remember about that show. The name he used, the booth number, if you have it, the date, the organizer you spoke to, every detail. I will have it for you by morning." He shook my hand at the door. Not the way a friend shakes your hand when he is sorry. The way a man shakes your hand when he has decided to stand with you regardless of what comes next. 2 names, 2 states, and the thread connecting them led straight into my living room. 3 days later, the thread pulled tighter. I was at the motel reading through Boyd's latest motion when a knock came at the door. 2 officers. Different officers this time, younger, one of them holding a clipboard. "Mr. Holbrook, we received a report that you drove to the residence on Arcadia Drive this evening and made verbal threats through the front window. How many times can you prove you are innocent before the system stops caring?" I had not left the motel room in over 3 hours. My truck was parked in the same spot it had been in since 4 o'clock. The dinner wrapper from the vending machine was still on the nightstand, time-stamped on the receipt. I told the officers all of this, and then I told them something better. "The motel has security cameras," I said, pointed at the parking lot and the hallway outside every room. I have not moved. The officer with the clipboard looked at his partner. They spoke to the motel manager, reviewed the footage, and came back 11 minutes later. "Security footage confirms you were here all evening, Mr. Holbrook," the younger officer said. "We are sorry for the trouble." They apologized and left. But the report was already filed, and in family court, accusations do not need to be true to leave a mark. I called Boyd that night and told him everything. He said he would file a motion to strike the report and flag it as fabricated. He also said something else. "The full investigator report is coming in tomorrow," he said. 3 states, 3 women, and what it shows is going to make everything we have learned so far look like prologue. Murray's memory gave me a second name. The camera gave me proof my wife was willing to lie to police. But the full picture, 3 wives, 3 states, 1 predator, was about to land on Boyd's desk. And what it revealed would change everything. The report landed on Boyd's desk the next morning. He called me before 9 and told me to come in immediately. Boyd Farrell laid the file between us like a man setting down a loaded weapon. 37 pages, tabbed and indexed, with photocopied documents from 3 states stapled to the back. The man living in my home had operated under at least 3 verified identities. In Nevada, he was Marcus Denton, married to a real estate agent in Reno for 14 months before draining her retirement accounts and disappearing. In Colorado, he was David Calloway, attached to a divorced veterinarian in Fort Collins for 11 months. Same result. In Georgia, the pattern was identical. Seduce a woman with concealed marital wealth. Isolate her husband. Establish a financial vehicle to consolidate the assets. Then vanish. 3 women trusted the same man. 3 families were gutted the same way, and not one of them saw it coming until the accounts were empty and the man was gone. I set the report down on Boyd's desk and pressed my palms flat against the wood. My hands were steady. The rest of me was not. 3 women, I said. 3 that we can confirm, Boyd said. The investigator believes there may be more, but these 3 have documentation. Court filings, police reports, financial records. I thought about Kieran. 1 wall away from a man who had done this at least 3 times before and gotten away clean every time. There is one more thing, Boyd said. He picked up the phone on his desk and dialed a number from the report. I reached one of the former victims yesterday. She agreed to talk to you directly. The speakerphone clicked. A woman's voice came through, steady and deliberate, with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed her nightmare enough times to tell it without shaking. Mr. Holbrook, my name is Constance Redmond, she said. I am 55 years old. and I was married to the man you know as Vance Ellsworth for 11 months in Fort Collins, Colorado. He called himself David when I knew him. Listening to Constance was like hearing someone describe the inside of a clock I was still trapped in. She told me how it started, the charm that felt organic. The way he positioned himself as a financial advisor who could help stabilize her accounts after her first divorce. The slow, surgical isolation of her support network friends who stopped calling. A restraining order that appeared out of nowhere. He does not improvise, Constance said. Every step is planned. The restraining order is step 1, the financial drain is step 2, and step 3 is always the same. What is step 3? I asked. He will set up something that looks like an investment, a fund, a holding company, something with an official name and paperwork that looks legitimate. That is where your money goes right before he walks out the door. The office was quiet. Boyd sat motionless, watching me. In my case, it was called Ridgeline Capital Partners. Constance continued. It existed for 6 weeks. By the time I found out about it, every dollar was gone, and so was he. No forwarding address, no trace. The fund dissolved the same day he left Colorado. She was not telling me a story. She was reading me my future, unless I moved faster than the 3 women before me. Mr. Holbrook, Constance said, and her voice tightened for the first time. He always leaves the same way. One day the fund is full, and the next day he is gone. Have you seen that sign yet? I did not answer her. Because I already knew. I just had not looked for it yet. I thanked Constance. She said something I did not expect. Get your son out first, she said. Everything else can be recovered. Your son cannot. The line went dead. I looked at Boyd. He was already pulling up the financial documents his team had gathered. Bank transfers, account openings, everything from the past 60 days. It took him less than 10 minutes. Here, he said, turning the monitor toward me. On the screen was a filing from the Arizona Corporation Commission. A new entity, registered 3 weeks ago under the name Copper Basin Holdings, LLC. The registered agent was a shell company in Nevada. The funding source was the home equity line Lorraine had opened with the second mortgage. 3 weeks old, already receiving transfers. Constance's sign was not a warning anymore. It was a countdown. I stared at the screen and did the math. If the pattern held, if Vance moved at the same speed he had moved in Nevada and Colorado and Georgia, then the fund would reach capacity in fewer than 3 weeks. And the day it did, the man sleeping in my house would disappear with everything inside it, including my son. I spread every document Boyd had sent me across the motel bedspread that night. Bank statements, transfer records, account openings, the shell company filing. For the first time in 45 years of careful work, my hands were not steady. The fund was called Copper Basin Holdings, 3 weeks old, registered through a Nevada shell company that traced back to a P.O. box in Henderson. On paper, it looked like a legitimate investment vehicle. But I had spent my life reading the inside of mechanisms, and this one had the same architecture as every other scheme the investigator had documented. The transfers were small, $4,000 here, $6,500 there, always under the reporting thresholds that would trigger a bank review. The kind of precision that does not come from greed alone, it comes from practice. I laid the transfer dates in a row across the bedspread and matched them against the timeline Constance had described from Colorado. In her case, the extraction had taken 9 weeks from the first transfer to the final liquidation. But when I compared the intervals, the numbers here were compressed. 5 weeks in, and the fund was already receiving transfers at nearly twice the rate. I had dismantled thousands of movements in my career, but I had never watched one being stripped in real time, gear by gear, while the owner was not allowed to touch it. Something had spooked him. Maybe Boyd's initial filings had reached Lorraine's attorney and filtered back. Maybe Kieran's behavior had shifted enough for a practiced predator to notice. Whatever the cause, Vance was accelerating. He was not following his usual 9-week cadence, he was compressing it. I pulled out the notebook I kept for serial numbers and started calculating the equity balance, the transfers already made, the rate of acceleration. I arrived at a number that sat in my chest like a cold stone. 21 days. That was how long I had to save 45 years of work, a 16-year-old boy, and whatever was left of my name. I called Boyd at 11 that night. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he had been waiting. I ran the numbers, I said. At this rate, the fund hits capacity in under 3 weeks. After that, he liquidates and disappears, just like Constance described. Boyd was quiet for a moment. I could hear him breathing, the sound of a man choosing his words the way a surgeon chooses an incision point. "The numbers are right," he said. "I ran them too. But here is the problem. Financial analysis will not be enough for family court on this timeline. A judge will look at transfer records and see theory, patterns, and projections. He will want something he cannot dismiss. Like what? Signatures, recordings, something physical. A document with Vance's name on it connected directly to the fund. A conversation where he admits what the money is for. Something a judge can hold in his hand and say, this is not speculation. What would you do? Wait for the law to catch up. Know it moves at its own pace and answers to no one's deadline. Or ask your own son to risk everything before it is too late. I did not ask. Not that night. But I knew. Sitting on the edge of that bed with 21 days of arithmetic staring up at me from the bedspread, that the only person with access to the inside of that house was 16 years old, sleeping down the hall from a man who had destroyed 3 families across 3 states. The financial trail was clear. Boyd had the legal strategy, the investigator had the interstate documentation, and Murray had the corroborating memory from Albuquerque. But none of it would matter if we could not produce the kind of evidence that survives cross-examination in a courtroom where a 65-year-old man was already presumed to be the problem. I called Kieran at midnight. Short call. I told him about the timeline without telling him what I needed. He listened. He did not ask what came next. He already knew. "Same time tomorrow," he said. Same time tomorrow. I sat on the edge of that motel bed until 3 in the morning, staring at the numbers. 21 days. Less than 3 weeks before 45 years of work vanished into a fund named after a copper basin that had never existed, managed by a man who had never existed, for the benefit of a future that included neither my wife nor my son. The next morning, I drove to Maricopa County Superior Court for an emergency hearing. I carried Boyd's binders, the investigator's report, and the motel security footage that proved my wife had lied to police. And I was certain, for the first time, that it would not be enough. Have you ever walked into a courtroom with the truth on your side and still known in your bones that it was not going to be enough? I walked into Maricopa County Superior Court that morning carrying 4 binders of evidence, a flash drive with security footage, and the quiet certainty of a man who had spent his life trusting precision. Boyd had filed the emergency motion 3 days earlier. The hearing was scheduled for 9. We were seated by 8:45. Judge Hargrove presided. A silver-haired man in his 60s with reading glasses perched on his nose. He ran the family division with the unhurried authority of someone who had seen every lie twice and stopped being surprised by any of them. He nodded for Boyd to begin. Boyd stood and connected the flash drive to the courtroom monitor. The footage appeared in grainy black and white, the Desert Rose Motor Lodge parking lot, the exterior hallway, and the door to room 14. Time-stamped. Continuous. 6 in the evening to 7 the next morning. "Your Honor," Boyd said, "Mrs. Holbrook filed a police report on May 3rd, alleging that Mr. Holbrook drove to the marital residence that evening and made verbal threats through the front window. The footage you are watching is from the motel's security system." Mr. Holbrook did not leave room 14 between 6 p.m. and 7 a.m. The report is demonstrably false. The footage played. 12 hours compressed into 3 minutes of nothing, my truck in the same parking space, the hallway empty, the door to my room closed and still. Not a shadow, not a footstep. She was caught lying to police, lying to a judge, and she was still winning. Lorraine sat at the opposing table with her attorney, a man named Galbraith, who wore a blue tie and the expression of someone recalculating in real time. Lorraine's hands were folded in her lap. She did not look at the screen. "Your Honor," Galbraith said, standing before the footage finished, "my client may have been mistaken about the timing. She was frightened, she was under stress, and she believed she saw a vehicle consistent with—" "The vehicle is in the motel parking lot for the entire duration," Boyd said. "There is nothing to be mistaken about." Judge Hargrove removed his glasses and set them on the bench. He looked at the screen, then at Lorraine, then at me. I watched his face the way I watch a balance wheel, looking for the slightest wobble that tells you which direction the mechanism is going to fall. He saw a 65-year-old man living in a motel. He saw a 48-year-old woman in a clean coat sitting in a stable home. And I watched the math happen behind his eyes, the kind of math that has nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with assumption. Let me tell you something about family court. It does not reward the honest man. It rewards the one who looks like he belongs. While the court notes the discrepancy in Mrs. Holbrook's report, Judge Hargrove said, the court must also consider the child's current living stability. The minor is enrolled in school, maintaining his routine, and residing in the marital home. Temporary custody will remain as ordered pending the full hearing. Discrepancy. He called a fabricated police report a discrepancy, the way you might call a cracked mainspring a minor adjustment. I sat in that chair and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, I had moved past anger weeks ago, something colder. The system I had trusted to protect my son was not broken. It was functioning exactly as designed, and it was designed to favor the person who looked stable. Boyd walked me out into the corridor. The hallway smelled like floor wax and recycled air. He waited until we were past the elevators before he spoke. "Being innocent is not enough anymore," he said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the edge beneath it. "We have to prove she is an active predator, not careless, not confused, not mistaken, an active, coordinated predator, working with a man who has done this across state lines. And we have to do it before that fund drains dry." I had handed the judge a perfect clock, every gear aligned, every second accounted for, and he set it aside because he did not like the case it came in. I drove back to Old Town in silence. The countdown was still running. The fund was still draining. My son was still behind walls I could not cross. And a judge had just told me, in the gentlest possible language, that being right was not the same as being believed. I opened the shop that afternoon because I did not know what else to do. I sat at my bench and worked on a movement I had been neglecting, and I let my hands do what they have always done when the rest of me is breaking: find the flaw. Align the parts. Trust the process. At 4 o'clock, the shop bell rang. Murray Prescott walked through the door. He did not sit in the chair by the window. He did not bring a pocket watch. He walked straight to my bench, put both hands on the counter, and said 6 words. "I will stand in front of anyone." Murray stood in the doorway of my shop that afternoon, the way a man stands at a confession booth, ashamed, determined, and unable to leave without finishing what he came say. I let him talk. He told me Boyd's office had shared enough of the investigator's findings to make him sick, and that he had not slept properly since the night he crossed the street. I did not tell him it was fine. It was not fine. But I told him the truth that he was here now, and that mattered more than the weeks he was not. "I have known you 20 years, Murray said. He placed both hands flat on my workbench, the way a man places his hands when he wants you to see they are not shaking. I will stand in front of anyone to say that. A judge, a jury, a courtroom full of strangers, whatever you need. He did not owe me anything. That is exactly why it mattered. We sat in the shop for an hour. I told him about the hearing, the judge's ruling, the countdown on the fund. I did not tell him about Kieran's surveillance. That was a weight I would not place on anyone who did not need to carry it. Murray listened quietly, and when I finished, he nodded once. "What do you need from me first?" he asked. "A formal deposition. Boyd will schedule it. You tell them about the trade show in Albuquerque, the different name, the booth that disappeared overnight. That's the independent corroboration we need. A man who crosses the street to avoid you and then comes back to stand beside you, that is not friendship recovering. That is friendship being tested and passing." Murray left at 5. I locked the shop and drove back to the motel. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than dread. I had a lawyer who believed me, an investigator pulling at threads across 3 states, a friend willing to put his name on record, and a son who had been holding the line from inside a house I could not enter. The feeling lasted until 9:47 that evening. Kieran's first text arrived while I was reviewing Boyd's deposition outline on the motel bed. 3 words, "Something is different." I picked up the prepaid and waited. The next message came 2 minutes later. "He checked the hallway 3 times tonight before they talked. He never does that. He also locked the kitchen door, which he's never done before. A spooked mechanism behaves differently than a broken one. It speeds up, overcorrects, and eventually throws every gear around it out of alignment. Vance was not broken. Vance was spooked." I typed back carefully. "What did they talk about?" The reply took 4 minutes. Each minute felt like a year. "He's pushing Mom to sign the sale papers this week. He said the lawyer is asking too many questions and they need to move before someone freezes the accounts. He kept saying, 'timeline,' over and over. Mom looked scared." I read the message twice. Vance had sensed the investigation. Maybe Lorraine's attorney had mentioned Boyd's motions. Maybe the investigators' inquiries had triggered a flag somewhere in the paper trail. Whatever the cause, the predator was accelerating. The next text arrived 30 seconds later, and it hit me like a fist in the chest. "Dad, I think he's starting to suspect me." I stared at the screen. The motel room was silent except for the air conditioner and the blood pounding in my ears. "What happened?" I typed. "After dinner, he stopped me in the hallway, asked me why I was up so late last night. I said homework. He looked at me for a long time and said, 'You're a smart kid,' but he didn't say it like a compliment. He said it like a warning. Imagine getting that text from your 16-year-old son, trapped behind a court order, 500 feet away, and the only thing you can do is type back." I typed, "Do not change your routine. Do not react. If he asks again, be bored, be 16, be invisible." "I know, Dad." "If anything feels wrong, anything you leave, walk to the neighbor's house and call this number." "I know." I set the phone down and pressed my palms against my eyes. Until that moment, we had been the ones watching, but now the predator was watching back. And the difference between a predator who ignores you and a predator who notices you is the difference between a clock ticking down and a clock about to strike. My son was no longer invisible. I had allies, evidence, and a ticking clock. But Kieran was behind that door alone. And the next time Vance cornered him, there would be no text warning first. The confrontation came 2 nights later, exactly the way I feared it would, without warning. Kieran was halfway to the bathroom when the hallway light clicked on. Vance Ellsworth was standing 3 feet in front of him, arms crossed, blocking the way. Kieran told me all of this on the prepaid at 1 in the morning, his voice so low I had to press the phone against my skull to hear him. "He just appeared," Kieran whispered, "like he'd been waiting in the dark." Vance had leaned against the wall with the easy posture of a man who had done this before. Not threatening, not aggressive. Just present. the way a cat is present when it sits in front of a mouse hole. "You're always around, aren't you?" Vance had said. "Every time I turn a corner, there you are. What exactly are you listening for?" Kieran told me he shrugged. He said he had his headphones around his neck and was carrying a glass from the kitchen. He looked Vance in the eye and said, "I was getting water. It's my house." 4 words, delivered with the flat disinterest of a teenager who could not care less about the adult standing in his hallway. No tremor, no hesitation. The kind of performance that only works when the actor understands the stakes well enough to suppress every natural instinct screaming at him to run. Picture your 16-year-old son standing alone in a dark hallway, 3 feet from a man who has destroyed 3 families, and the only weapon he has is a straight face. Vance had studied him for a long beat. Then he uncrossed his arms, said, "Get some sleep, kid," and walked back toward the master bedroom. Kieran waited until the door closed, then walked to the hallway outlet where the recording device was taped behind the decorative plate cover. He pressed record. "I got it running after he left," Kieran told me. "I don't know if it caught anything, but it's recording now." My son looked a con artist in the eye and lied better than the con artist did, and that terrified me more than anything Vance could have said. Not because Kieran failed, because he succeeded. Because a 16-year-old boy should not need to be that good at deception. And the fact that he was meant this had already changed him in ways I might never be able to undo. A routine. If anything shifts, get out. "I know, Dad," he said, and we hung up. 3 days later, I sat across from Boyd in his Tempe office and watched him open a folder that smelled like toner and finality. "Georgia," Boyd said. He laid a printout on the desk between us, a booking photograph. A man 15 pounds lighter, with shorter hair and a different jawline angle, but the eyes were the same. The smile was the same. That salesman's confidence that never quite reached the corners. Different name, different social security number, same scheme. Boyd read from the investigator's summary. "Fraud, theft by deception, asset forfeiture." He served 14 months in a Georgia state facility and walked out a different man. Literally. 14 months in a Georgia prison, and when he walked out, he did not reform. He rebranded. The Georgia case matched Constance Redmond's account detail for detail. A married woman with accessible assets. A charming financial advisor who appeared at precisely the right moment. The systematic isolation of the husband. The fabricated investment vehicle. The vanishing act. The only difference was that in Georgia he got caught, but not before the money was gone. The victim recovered nothing. The prison sentence was a slap. And the man who walked out the gates 18 months ago had simply assembled a new identity the way someone assembles a model kit. Piece. Until the surface looked real enough to fool everyone who was not looking underneath. 3 identities, 3 states, and my wife had handed him the keys to the 4th. "We have enough to put him away," Boyd said. He closed the folder and looked at me with the expression of a man delivering good news inside a burning building. "The question is whether we have enough time before the fund drains and he disappears again." We had the blueprint of the bomb, every wire traced and labeled. But the fuse was already lit, and the clock on it belonged to someone else. Boyd pulled out a calendar. The fund was still receiving transfers. The house sale paperwork was being pushed through Lorraine's attorney. The countdown I had calculated at the motel was no longer theoretical, it was operational. Days, not weeks. "I've scheduled a deposition for the end of this week," Boyd said. "Lorraine and her counsel. Standard discovery procedure, nothing that should raise alarms." He paused. "But I need something from you." "Name it. When you walk in there, I need you to be the confused old man they already think you are." I looked at him. "They built their entire case on the premise that you are senile, slow, and financially incompetent," Boyd said. "Let them believe it. The more harmless you look in that room, the more freely they will talk. and the more they talk, the more we get on record before the final hearing. He wanted me to perform weakness, to sit in a room with the woman who stole my life and the lawyer who helped her do it and pretend I did not understand what was happening. 45 years of precision, and now the most important thing I could do was act broken. "I can do that," I said. I practiced forgetting my own name in the mirror that morning, rehearsing confusion the way I once rehearsed precision, until every hesitation looked involuntary. A slow blink here, a trailing sentence there. The careful performance of a man whose mind was slipping through his fingers like sand. The deposition was scheduled for 10 o'clock at opposing counsel Galbraith's office in a glass tower off Central Avenue. Boyd drove us. In the elevator, he looked at me one last time. "Remember," he said, "you are confused. You are overwhelmed. You have never understood the family finances. Let them feel smart." I nodded. The elevator opened. The conference room smelled like new carpet and toner. Lorraine sat across the table in a cream blouse, her posture composed, her eyes cool. Galbraith sat beside her with a yellow legal pad. And behind them, in a chair against the wall that was technically for observers only, Vance Ellsworth sat with his legs crossed and his phone in his hand, watching me the way a cat watches a bird that has already stopped flying. Acting broken is its own kind of craftsmanship. You have to know exactly how every piece works before you can convincingly pretend it does not. Galbraith began with the financial questions. I let each question hang in the air a beat too long. I confused the checking account with the savings account. When he asked about the balance of our joint accounts as of January, I looked at Boyd, then at the table, then back at Galbraith. "I think Lorraine handled that," I said. "I fix watches. The numbers get away from me sometimes." Lorraine's mouth tightened, not with concern, with satisfaction. She was watching her own narrative confirmed in real time, the senile old man who could not manage his own finances, who needed a younger wife to hold the household together. Every pause was calculated, 45 years of precision, and the hardest thing I ever built was a convincing fool. The deposition lasted 90 minutes. By the end, Galbraith had stopped asking complex questions entirely, wrapping up early because the witness across the table was clearly not worth the billing hours. Vance had not looked up from his phone in 20 minutes. They looked at me the way people look at a clock that has stopped. No threat, no value, just something to step around on the way out. Boyd shook Galbraith's hand at the door. We did not speak until we reached the parking structure. "They bought every second of it," Boyd said once we were inside the stairwell. "Now we wait for them to celebrate." We did not have to wait long. Boyd went to get the car from the 3rd level. I stayed in the stairwell on the 2nd landing, leaning against the concrete wall, letting the performance drain out of me. My hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from the effort of suppressing every instinct that had told me to stand up in that room, look Lorraine in the eye, and tell her I knew everything. Then I heard their voices. The stairwell carried sound the way a cathedral carries an organ note, every syllable amplified by concrete and dead air. They were one flight below, walking toward the garage level. Vance's voice first, then Lorraine's, relaxed and unhurried. The voices of two people who believed they had just watched the last obstacle remove itself. "It's done," Vance said. His tone was casual, operational. "Once the court rules, transfer everything to the new fund. Then we disappear." "What about the house?" Lorraine asked. "Sell it fast, below market if you have to. Speed is what matters now." He used the word disappear, the way he had used it before in Nevada, in Colorado, in Georgia, and every time someone's life was left in pieces behind him. I stood in that stairwell and did not breathe. Their footsteps echoed below. A car door opened, an engine started. They drove away. I pressed my back against the concrete wall. The surface was cold and rough through my shirt. The word disappear hung in the stairwell like smoke. They had a timeline, They had a plan. They believed the old man across the table had confirmed everything they needed, that I was slow, confused, and incapable of mounting a defense before the court ruled in their favor. Boyd pulled up 3 minutes later. I got in and told him what I had heard. He gripped the steering wheel and said nothing for a full block. "We need proof a judge can hold," he finally said. "Not what you overheard in a stairwell. Something recorded. Something undeniable." Somewhere inside my house, my son was about to hear it all again, this time with a camera running. Kieran pressed his back flat against the hallway wall, 2 feet from the living room doorframe, and held his breath while the 2 people planning to destroy his father laughed over wine on the other side. He told me all of this later. Every word, every pause, every detail captured by a memory sharpened on years of watching small mechanisms and listening for the sounds that did not belong. Vance and Lorraine were on the couch. The television was on, but the volume was low, background noise, the kind of ambient cover that makes people feel private when they are not. Kieran had positioned himself in the hallway at 10:15 after they heard his bedroom door close, after they assumed the kid was asleep. He was not asleep. He was cataloging. "The hearing is in 3 days, Vance said. His voice was relaxed, the cadence of a man running through a checklist. "The moment the judge rules, we move the last transfer. By Friday, I will have the fund liquidated and we are gone." 3 days. The countdown I had calculated from bank statements and transfer records now had a voice attached to it. A calm, practiced voice that treated the destruction of a family the way a shipping clerk treats a manifest. "What about the boy?" Lorraine asked. "The boy is not our problem," Vance said. "Once custody is settled, he is the old man's headache, if the old man even gets him." My 16-year-old son was standing in a dark hallway, memorizing the blueprint of his own family's destruction. And the only thing between that information and justice was his ability to stay invisible for 3 more days. Kieran listened for another 20 minutes. He heard them discuss the house sell it fast, below market, speed over price. He heard Vance mention a rental car reserved for Friday under a name Kieran did not recognize. He heard Lorraine ask about the new account routing, and Vance walked her through it step by step, the way a teacher walks a student through long division, patient, thorough. The tone of a man who had explained this procedure before to other women, in other living rooms, in other states. Then the television went off. Footsteps toward the stairs. Kieran retreated to his room without making a sound. "Before I tell you what my son did next, I want to ask you something. From 1 to 10, how far would you let your own child go to save your family? Comment your number and tell me why. Because this is where everything turns." A quick note. The next part includes some dramatized details added to deepen the emotional impact. What matters is the lesson behind it. Kieran waited until the house was silent. Midnight passed, the hallway settled into the deep quiet that only exists in a home where everyone believes they are safe. Then he pulled out the prepaid phone and called me. I was sitting on the motel bed, fully dressed, staring at the wall. I picked up before the first ring finished. "Dad," he said. His voice was steady but thin, the way a wire sounds when it is pulled taut. "They will do it right after court. 3 days. The fund, the house, all of it." Then he gone. He told me everything. The 3-day window, the rental car under a false name, the routing instructions Vance had walked Lorraine through like a rehearsed script. Every detail, delivered in order, with timestamps, the way I had taught him to document a repair. Then he said something I was not ready for. "I know where they sit," he said. "I know when they talk. I know the angle and I know the timing. I can get it on camera tomorrow night, but you have to trust me on this one." What do you say to a son who is asking you to walk back into danger when you know he is right, and you know you cannot stop him? He was not asking for permission. He was giving me a chance to say yes before he did it anyway. I could hear it in his voice. the same quiet certainty I heard in my own head when I sat down at a workbench with a movement everyone else had given up on. He had already decided. The question was whether I would stand with him or stand in his way. I closed my eyes. The motel room was dark. The air conditioner rattled. Somewhere outside, a truck pulled into the lot, and its headlights swept across the curtain. "Where will you put the camera?" I asked. "Living room shelf. Behind the books Mom never reads. The angle covers the couch and the coffee table where they spread out the documents." "What time?" "After 10, same as always. They think I am asleep by 9:30. And if something goes wrong, I leave. I walk to the neighbor's house. I call this number. Same plan as always. Dad." Same plan as always, as if any of this were normal. As if a 16-year-old planting surveillance equipment in his own living room while a career predator slept upstairs were something that belonged in the category of always. I told him yes. I told him to be careful. I told him I loved him. "I know, Dad," he said. "Same time tomorrow." I sat in the dark of that motel room, staring at anywhere. To the American night, my son would plant a camera in a room where a career predator was planning his exit. Everything we had fought for would come down to whether a 16-year-old boy could stay invisible for one more night. Kieran waited until the shower was running upstairs, then crossed the living room in 4 steps and wedged the camera between 2 hardcovers on the shelf above the television, lens aimed at the couch. Red recording light disabled with a strip of electrical tape. Silent, invisible, done. He told me later that the whole thing took 11 seconds. He had rehearsed it in his room with a stack of textbooks, over and over until his hands did not shake. My son placed a camera the way I taught him, to set a watch spring, one precise motion, no second chance, and then you step back and let the mechanism do its work. He retreated to his bedroom, closed the door, and waited. The nightly routine began at 10:15. Kieran heard the footsteps on the stairs, the clink of glasses from the kitchen, the soft pop of a wine cork. The television clicked on in the living room. Then the voices settled into the rhythm he had memorized over weeks of listening, relaxed, unhurried, the cadence of 2 people who believed they were completely alone. Kieran lay on his bed with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, counting minutes. The camera held still. It did not judge, it did not flinch, it just let the truth walk into frame. Which is exactly what my son had learned to do. I was not there. I did not hear the conversation as it happened. I heard it later, on Boyd's laptop, in his Tempe office, with the morning sun coming through the blinds and coffee going cold on the desk. But I will tell it to you the way it was recorded, because the camera caught every word. Lorraine was on the couch with her feet tucked under her, holding a glass of red wine. Vance sat beside her, one arm along the backrest, his phone on the coffee table. They were laughing about the deposition. "He could barely remember his own account numbers," Lorraine said. "His lawyer had to help him through every answer." "The restraining order was genius, by the way," Vance said. He raised his glass. "Judge ate it up. The old man looked like a stray dog in that courtroom." They toasted with my wine, on my couch, in my house, and confessed to destroying my life like it was a punchline to a joke only they were in on. Lorraine leaned into him. "After Friday, where do we go?" Vance sipped his wine. He did not look at her. He looked at the television, where a baseball game was playing on mute, and when he spoke, his voice had shifted. Not warmer, colder. The shift was subtle, but I caught it on the recording the way I catch a hairspring losing tension in the space between one tick and the next. "We," he said. Lorraine pulled back slightly. "What do you mean, we?" "Lorraine, you are a lovely woman." He still did not look at her, but I travel light. Once the fun clears, I handle the next stage alone. You keep the divorce paperwork and whatever is left of the house. The living room went quiet. The baseball game flickered on the muted screen. Lorraine's wine glass stopped moving halfway to her mouth. "You said we were doing this together," she said. "We did do it together, and now it is done. You will have the house equity, the divorce settlement, the custody ruling. That is more than enough to start fresh." "Start fresh." Her voice cracked on the second word. "You told me we were moving to—" "I told you what you needed to hear," Vance said. He said it without cruelty, without apology, the way a man closes a ledger when the numbers are final. "That is what I do, Lorraine. I tell people what they need to hear, and then I leave. It has worked 4 times now, and it is going to work again." She went quiet. Not the silence of understanding. The silence of a woman realizing she was never the partner, she was the next victim. In that moment, watching the footage in Boyd's office, I did not feel anger toward Lorraine anymore. I felt something worse. I felt sorry for her, and I hated that I did. She had tried to destroy me. She had lied to a judge, drained my accounts, stolen my son's safety, and fabricated a police report to put me in jail. And she was sitting on my couch, discovering that the man she had done all of it for was planning to leave her with nothing, exactly the way he had left 3 women before her. The camera kept recording for another 12 minutes. Lorraine did not speak again. Vance finished his wine, checked his phone, and went upstairs. She sat alone on the couch in the dark, staring at the television, and the camera caught the moment her hand began to shake. Kieran retrieved the camera at 5 in the morning, before anyone stirred. He copied the file to the tablet, encrypted it the way Boyd's investigator had taught him, and sent it to Boyd's secure email at 4:12 a.m. By 6, Boyd had watched it twice. By 7, he called me. I had never heard Boyd Farrell's voice shake before, not during the restraining order, not during the emergency hearing. Not when he read me the investigator's report on 3 states and 3 identities. But it shook now. "This does not just win your case," he said. "This ends them both, but there is something in the last 30 seconds you need to see. Because it changes who the victim really is." Boyd had told me what the last 30 seconds contained. I watched it on his laptop in the parking lot before we walked into court. Vance, alone on the couch after Lorraine went upstairs, pulling out his phone and murmuring to someone. Dates, account numbers, a one-way flight. The final proof that he was leaving her behind. But that was for later. First, Lorraine had a performance to deliver. She took the witness stand in a navy dress I had bought her 3 Christmases ago. She pressed a tissue to her eyes and began to lie with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every tear. Her voice cracked at the right moments. Her hands trembled when they needed to tremble. She looked at Judge Hargrove the way a daughter looks at a father, searching for protection. "He terrified me," she said. "He terrified our son. There were nights I locked the bedroom door because I did not know what he would do. If it were not for Vance stepping in when he did, I do not know what would have happened to us." She called him a brave friend. She called me unstable. She described an incident entirely fabricated where I threatened to burn the house down with Kieran inside. Her attorney, Galbraith, guided each answer like a conductor guiding a symphony, every question designed to build a picture of a violent, deteriorating old man who had no business being near a child. I sat motionless at the defendant's table. Boyd's hand rested on the first of 4 thick binders lined up in front of him. I let her climb. Every watchmaker knows, the higher you wind a spring past its tolerance, the more spectacular the snap. When Lorraine stepped down from the stand, the courtroom was quiet. She had been convincing. I could feel the weight of her testimony pressing against the room like humidity before a storm. Galbraith looked satisfied. Vance sat behind him with his legs crossed, his phone in his lap. The posture of a man watching a play he had already seen. Boyd stood. He did not raise his voice. He never did. He opened the first binder and began reading. 11 credit cards opened in Lorraine's name over the past 2 years, none of them disclosed in the financial filings. A second mortgage taken 7 months before the divorce was filed, proceeds used to cover personal debts she had accumulated without my knowledge. He turned to the second binder. The investigator's complete report. 3 identities across 3 states. A criminal conviction in Georgia under a name that did not match any document Vance had filed with this court. 4 binders, 3 states, 11 credit cards, a criminal record, and the judge was still thinking about my age. Boyd opened the 3rd binder. The investment fund registered 3 weeks before the divorce filing, already receiving transfers from the house equity line, routed through a shell company in Nevada. He laid the transfer records on the bench like playing cards. Dates, amounts, routing numbers. Each one a thread in a web that connected my living room to a disappearing act that had been executed 3 times before in 3 other states. This was not a divorce, Your Honor, Boyd said. This was an extraction. Planned, coordinated, and executed by a man sitting in this courtroom under his 3rd known identity. With a fraud pattern spanning 4 states and a criminal record he concealed from this court. The room went cold. I watched Lorraine's face. The tears had stopped. Galbraith was writing furiously on his legal pad. Then Galbraith stood, and what he did next was brilliant. He threw Vance under the bus. Your Honor, my client was manipulated by Mr. Ellsworth, Galbraith said, his voice measured and controlled. She is a victim in this as well. The evidence Mr. Farrell has presented speaks to Mr. Ellsworth's pattern of predation, and my client was caught in it. She made errors in judgment born of fear and manipulation. He paused, let that land, then pivoted. But the question before this court is not whether Mr. Ellsworth is a criminal. The question is whether a 65-year-old man living in a motel room can provide the stable, active home environment a teenage boy requires. My client, whatever her mistakes, has maintained a household. She has kept the child in school, in routine, in a home. Mr. Holbrook has not. How much truth does it take to outweigh one man's assumption about what a 65-year-old is capable of doing? I watched Judge Hargrove lean back in his chair. I saw the old bias settle into his eyes, the same look he had given me at the emergency hearing. The same calculation. Not evidence versus lies, not truth versus fabrication. Just a 65-year-old man in a worn jacket against a 48-year-old woman in a clean dress, and the assumption that youth is stability and age is decline. Boyd felt it too. I could see it in the way his pen stopped moving. The room waited. Hargrove straightened his glasses. He reached for his gavel. And I knew the way you know a mainspring is about to snap before you hear the sound that the ruling forming behind his eyes was not going my way. Then a voice cut through the courtroom from the gallery, steady and clear. Please wait. Every head turned. Mine turned last, because I already knew the voice. Kieran was standing in the gallery, clutching a tablet to his chest. Every head in the courtroom turned toward the gallery. Mine turned last, because I already knew the voice. What I did not know was what my son was holding. Kieran walked forward from the gallery bench. He held the tablet flat against his chest with both hands, the way a man holds something fragile and irreplaceable. He stopped at the bar separating the gallery from the well of the court and looked directly at Judge Hargrove. Your Honor, he said, my father does not know what I am about to show. But the court needs to see it before you rule. Boyd stood immediately. Your Honor, I have not reviewed. That is the point, Mr. Farrell, Kieran said. He did not look at Boyd. He did not look at me. He looked at the judge with the steady focus of a boy who had spent weeks watching and waiting and had decided, in this moment, that the waiting was over. Judge Hargrove removed his glasses. He studied Kieran for a long beat, the lean frame, the watchful eyes, the hands that were not shaking, despite everything pressing against them. I will allow it, the judge said, but if this is theatrics, young man, I will hold your father in contempt. It is not theatrics, Your Honor, Kieran said. It is a video recorded in my own living room 2 nights ago. The bailiff took the tablet and connected it to the courtroom monitor. The screen flickered. Then, my living room appeared. The couch, the coffee table, the muted television in the background, and two people sitting close together, talking freely. You think you know what betrayal sounds like, but you have never heard your own wife laugh about destroying you while a judge sits 10 feet away. Lorraine's voice filled the courtroom, clear, relaxed, unguarded. She was laughing about the deposition, about how I could not remember my own account numbers, about how the judge had already made up his mind based on my age. Her exact words came through the speakers with the fidelity of a confession recorded under oath. The old man actually thinks the judge will believe him over a crying wife half his age, she said on the video. She was smiling, wine glass in hand, comfortable. I watched Lorraine in the courtroom. The real Lorraine, the one sitting at the defense table in the navy dress. Her face did not move, her body did not move, but something behind her eyes collapsed. The way a structure collapses when the load-bearing wall is removed, not with a crash, but with a slow, irreversible settling. The video continued. Vance's voice now, walking Lorraine through the transfer sequence. Account routing, fund liquidation timeline. The house sale. Below market. Speed over price. Every detail Boyd had alleged in the binders was now being confirmed by the people who planned it, in their own words, on their own couch. A watchmaker knows some mechanisms are not broken. They were built to self-destruct, and Lorraine had just triggered hers. Then the video reached the part I had seen on Boyd's laptop in the parking lot. The part that changed who the victim really was. Lorraine on the video leaned into Vance and asked where they would go after Friday. And Vance, without looking at her, said the words that turned the courtroom inside out. A pause. Lorraine, you are a lovely woman, but I travel light and I travel alone. The courtroom heard it. Lorraine at the defense table heard it. And I watched her turn not toward the judge, not toward her attorney, but toward Vance Ellsworth, seated behind Galbraith's chair with his legs still crossed and his phone still in his lap. She stared at him with the expression of a woman watching the floor open beneath her feet. Vance did not look back. Lorraine reached for his arm. He pulled away. Boyd stood. His voice was the only sound in the room. Your Honor, the defense submits a second recording into evidence. It was captured 3 weeks prior to this video, on a different device, in the same residence. He held up the tablet containing Kieran's first recording, the muffled one, the one that had seemed like nothing. The audio is unclear, but the background contains a television broadcast with a network timestamp. That timestamp corroborates the date of the primary video and confirms it was not staged or fabricated after the fact. The failed recording, the garbled, muffled 40 minutes of white noise that Kieran had saved in a hidden folder labeled with a homework assignment name. The file I had told him to keep because a good watchmaker never throws out a part until he is sure it does not fit somewhere else. It fit. Judge Hargrove looked at the monitor. He looked at Lorraine, whose hand was still suspended in the air where Vance's arm had been. He looked at Vance, who had uncrossed his legs and was staring at the courtroom doors with the focused attention of a man calculating distance. He looked at Kieran, who had walked back to the gallery bench and sat down with his hands folded in his lap, quiet and still, the way I had taught him to be when the mechanism was doing its work. The video ended. The monitor went dark. Nobody in that courtroom moved. Not the judge, not the bailiff, not Galbraith, who had set down his pen like a man watching a building collapse from the inside. The courtroom did not breathe. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and 2 Maricopa County deputies walked straight past me toward the defense table. Vance saw them coming. I watched his face. There was no surprise, no panic. He uncrossed his legs, set his phone on the chair beside him, and stood with the same easy posture he had carried into every room since the day he walked into my house with 2 suitcases and a borrowed name. Vance Ellsworth, the first deputy said. "You are under arrest on a federal warrant, interstate fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud across 3 states. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." He turned. He placed his hands behind his back. The handcuffs clicked with a sound I will remember for the rest of my life, not loud, not dramatic, just the precise mechanical engagement of 2 pieces of metal doing exactly what they were designed to do. His eyes found Kieran in the gallery before they found Lorraine. "Smart kid," he said quietly, almost admiring. "I should have trusted that warning to myself." Then he looked at Lorraine. He smiled. Not the salesman's smile he wore for courtrooms and conference tables, something smaller, something final. He leaned toward her as the deputy took his arm and said loud enough for the front rows to hear, "You really should have read the fine print, sweetheart." Lorraine reached for him, her hand extended across the space between the chairs, fingers open, grasping. He turned away without a word. The deputies walked him out through the side door. The door closed behind him with a heavy click, and Vance Ellsworth left my life the same way he entered it, like he owned every room he passed through. Have you ever watched someone lose everything in a room designed to protect them, and realize they built the trap themselves? Judge Hargrove waited until the side door closed. Then he put his glasses back on, opened the file in front of him, and began speaking in a tone I had not heard from him before. Not measured, not cautious, direct. "The emergency restraining order filed on April 15th is vacated, effective immediately," he said. "The divorce petition filed by Mrs. Holbrook is dismissed with prejudice for fraud upon this court. I am referring this matter to the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office for investigation of perjury and filing a false police report." He turned a page. "All debts incurred solely under Mrs. Holbrook's name, including the second mortgage and all associated credit obligations, are ruled her individual responsibility. Mrs. Holbrook, you will vacate the marital property at 4716 Arcadia Drive within 24 hours. Galbraith sat motionless. He did not object. He did not ask for clarification. He closed his briefcase with the careful movements of a man who understood that the best thing he could do for his client now was stop talking. He did not look at Lorraine. A watchmaker knows when the last gear clicks into place. The mechanism does not celebrate. It simply runs the way it was always supposed to. Judge Hargrove turned another page. His voice shifted again, not softer exactly, but something in the register changed. The judge was still speaking, but the man behind the title was leaning forward. "Full custody of the minor child is granted to the father, effective immediately. All parental rights of the mother are suspended pending the district attorney's investigation." I heard the words. I understood them, but they did not land the way I expected. There was no rush of triumph, no wave of relief, just a settling. The way a mechanism settles when the tension finally releases and the balance wheel begins to swing freely for the first time. Then Judge Hargrove did something I had never seen a judge do. He turned to the gallery. He looked directly at Kieran, who was sitting on the bench with his hands folded in his lap, quiet and still. "Young man," the judge said. He removed his glasses. "What you did today took more courage than most adults show in a lifetime. You showed more courage than anyone in this room." Kieran nodded once. His hands were still shaking. I could see the tremor from 15 feet away, the same hands that had placed a camera with 11 seconds of surgical precision. The same hands that had held a tablet steady in front of a courtroom full of strangers while his mother's voice destroyed her own case. My son was 16 years old. He had carried this weight alone because he did not trust anyone else to carry it right. I stood from the defendant's table. Boyd put a hand on my arm, but I was already moving. I walked to the gallery railing and reached across it. I put my hand on Kieran's shoulder. He looked up at me. And for the first time in 2 months, my son did not have to be brave. His face crumpled. Not with tears with release, the kind of collapse that only happens when the person holding everything together finally hears someone say, "You can put it down now." I held his shoulder. He pressed his forehead against my arm. The courtroom emptied around us. Boyd found me in the corridor 10 minutes later. He was carrying his 4 binders under one arm, his briefcase in the other. He was not smiling the way a winning lawyer should. "The trust is safe," he said. "The fund has been frozen. The federal warrant covers everything Vance touched. The withdrawal never went through. The account has frozen every name on it, real or not." I looked at him. "Today, take your son home." Boyd caught me before I reached the elevator. He had his phone in one hand and the look of a man tying off the last stitch. "It's over," he said. "Every dollar Vance touched is accounted for." The fortress I had built in silence for 45 years had held. Boyd shook my hand the way men do when the bill has been paid and both sides know the cost. "Go home, Cedric," he said. I turned toward the elevator, and then I saw her. Lorraine was sitting on a marble bench at the end of the corridor, alone. Galbraith was gone. Her coat was unbuttoned. Her mascara had drawn 2 dark lines down her cheeks, and she was staring at the floor with the expression of someone who has just heard a sound she will never stop hearing. I expected anger when I saw her, but all I felt was the weight of 17 years collapsing into a stranger's face. She stood when I approached, not with defiance, not with the composure she had carried into every hearing. She stood the way a person stands when they have run out of places to sit. "I only wanted what was fair," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "I did not know he would do that. I did not know what he was." I stopped walking. Kieran was beside me, slightly behind, one hand gripping the back of my jacket the way he used to grip it when he was 5 and the world was too loud. "You want me to tell you I felt nothing, but standing 3 feet from the woman who tried to erase you, you feel everything, just quieter than you expected." "A mistake is forgetting a bill," I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "What you did was a choice, made again and again, for 7 months, while our son slept down the hall." She flinched, not at the words, at the tone, because the tone was not angry, it was finished, and finished is worse than angry, because angry still cares. "The restraining order," I continued, "the false police report, the drained accounts, the accusations in court, none of that was a mistake. Lorraine, every one of those was a decision you made with your eyes open." She looked past me, at Kieran. "Kieran," she said. "Just his name. The way a person says a word they are afraid they are losing the right to use." Kieran did not look at her. He tightened his grip on my jacket and stared straight ahead, at the elevator doors at the end of the hall. He did not speak. He did not move, and his silence said more than any verdict the judge had delivered. The most devastating ruling in that courthouse did not come from the bench. It came from a 16-year-old boy who refused to turn his head. I looked at Lorraine one last time. I did not say goodbye. There was no goodbye to say. 17 years of marriage ended in a marble hallway with no raised voices and no farewell, just 2 people who had run out of things to pretend. I put my hand on Kieran's shoulder and walked toward the elevator. A watchmaker does not mourn a broken movement. He sets it aside, picks up the next case, and starts again with steadier hands. We walked down the courthouse steps into late afternoon sun. The Arizona heat was still climbing toward summer, and the light hit the parking lot with that flat, honest intensity that leaves no shadows. Kieran walks beside me with his backpack over one shoulder, the same backpack that had carried the hidden phone, the recording tablet, and every piece of evidence that saved us. Neither of us spoke for a long time. We crossed the parking lot. I unlocked the truck. The cab smelled like old upholstery and machine oil, the way it always had. And something about that familiar scent loosened a knot in my chest I had not realized was there. Kieran pulled the door shut and sat with his hands in his lap. He looked out the windshield at the courthouse, at the building where he had stood up in front of a room full of adults and done what none of them could do. "Dad?" he said. "Are we going home?" 2 words, the simplest question in the world, and the hardest one I had been asked in 2 months. "Yeah," I said. "We are going home." I started the truck. The engine turned over the way it always did, reliable, unhurried, the mechanical equivalent of a deep breath. I pulled out of the parking lot and turned east toward Arcadia. The sun hit the windshield like it had been waiting for us. My son sat beside me with his window cracked open, the warm air moving through the cab, and for the first time in 2 months, that was enough. Not the money, not the court order, not the arrest, just my son in the passenger seat, going home. As I turned onto the main road, my phone buzzed in the cup holder, a text from Murray Prescott, 3 words and a photo. The photo showed the front window of my shop in Old Town Scottsdale. Someone had taped a handwritten sign to the glass. It read, "Welcome back, Cedric." The first customer who came back did not bring a watch. He brought a casserole dish covered in foil and an apology he had clearly been rehearsing for 6 weeks. He stood in the doorway holding the dish with both hands and said he was sorry he had not come sooner. I took the casserole. I thanked him. I did not tell him what his absence had cost, because some debts are too small to collect and too large to forget. Over the first week of June, they trickled back. Old customers, neighbors, people whose watches I had repaired for a decade. Some brought excuses. They had been busy. They had not known the full story. Some brought silence, which was harder to carry but easier to believe. A few just set broken watches on the counter without meeting my eyes, as if the transaction itself was the apology. I fixed them all. Every cracked crystal, every slipped mainspring, every worn crown. I did not ask where they had been. A watchmaker does not interrogate the clock for being late. He resets it and moves on. The shop smelled like brass polish and cedar again. The bell above the door rang 3, 4, 5 times a day, filling a silence I had stopped noticing, the way you stop hearing a hum until it stops. And then its return is louder than it ever was. How do you forgive a neighbor who believed the worst about you? I still do not have an answer, but I know you do not have to decide today, and that is enough. Murray came last. Wednesday afternoon, late light slanting through the front window. He walked in carrying a bottle of bourbon in a brown paper bag. He set it on the counter between a Seiko and a Hamilton, and lowered himself into the chair by the window. "I brought this instead of a speech," he said. "Figured you'd had enough of people talking." Good bourbon. Not cheap, not extravagant. The kind a man picks when he wants to say something true without using words. "You crossed the street when it mattered." "Murray," I said, "that's worth more than bourbon." He nodded once. He sat in that chair like he had been sitting there every afternoon for the past 2 months, and in a way that mattered. He had not left. He had shown up in Boyd's office when no one asked him to. He had testified when it was easier to stay home. The chair by the window was just where he rested afterward. We sat without speaking. The clock on the wall in 1940s sessions ticked steady and unhurried, the sound of a room returning to itself. My phone rang Thursday afternoon, Boyd's name on the snap. "Federal grand jury returned the indictment yesterday," he said. "Interstate wire fraud, identity theft, 3 counts each, Arizona, New Mexico, Georgia." I leaned against the workbench and set down the loop I had been holding. "And Lorraine?" I asked. Chapter 7 filed this morning. The debts are hers alone now, and the family court finalized it parental rights. Revoked permanently. It is done. Justice is a clock that runs on its own schedule. You can build it, wind it, set every gear in place, but you cannot make it strike before it is ready. I waited for something, relief, vindication, even sadness. What came was quiet, just quiet. The way a room sounds after the last echo fades, and all that remains is the space where the noise used to be. "Thank you, Boyd," I said, "for everything. There is one more thing." I heard papers shuffling. Constance Redmond's deposition triggered a chain reaction. Constance, the woman from Colorado who had warned me about the fund's structure, who had recognized the pattern because she had lived inside it. 3 other women came forward, Boyd continued. New Mexico, Georgia, one more here in Arizona, all with the same story, the same playbook. The same man under different names. I closed my eyes. The balance wheel of the Omega on the felt pad ticked faintly in the silence. "She warned me about the investment fund," I said. "That one call changed everything." "It changed more than your case. Her deposition is the spine of the federal file now. 3 other women spoke up because she went first. If you have ever wondered whether one phone call can matter, let me tell you what one did. A woman I never met in person reached across 3 state lines and pulled the thread that unraveled a man who had been running for 8 years. She did not do it for recognition. She did it because someone had to go first, and she decided it would be her. 3 other women spoke up, Boyd said again. He is not alone, and neither are they now. I thanked Boyd and hung up. I stood in the shop for a long time, the afternoon light fading across the display cases. Then I locked the door, turned the sign to closed, and drove home. Kieran was at the kitchen table, not doing homework, not on his phone. He had laid out every photograph of Lorraine from the house, face up, in a neat row across the wood. 17 years of holidays, birthdays, and ordinary Sundays, arranged edge to edge like evidence. He looked up when I came in. "I need to decide what to keep," he said. "How do you mourn someone who is still alive but chose to become a stranger?" I did not have an answer that evening. I am not sure I have one now. I sat down across from Kieran at the kitchen table. The photographs were arranged in rows, edges touching, like tiles in a mosaic neither of us had asked to build. 17 years of holidays and birthdays and ordinary Sundays laid out under the overhead light. Kieran picked up a photo from the near end of the row, a backyard party, a lopsided chocolate cake with 9 candles. "This one's from my 9th birthday," he said. "She actually baked that cake herself." "I remember," I said. "She burned the first one." He almost smiled. He set the photo aside the keep pile. Then he picked up another, studied it, and placed it face down in the shoebox at his elbow. Then another. Face down. Another. Face down. He moved through them with a steadiness that reminded me of the way I watch parts, not with anger, not with tenderness, but with the precision of someone who knows that every piece either belongs or it does not. He kept 3. 3 photographs out of maybe 40. The 9th birthday, a Christmas morning where she was laughing at something off camera, and one I did not recognize Lorraine sitting on the porch steps in a sundress, looking at something in the distance. Years before any of this began. "I'm not keeping them because I forgive her," Kieran said. He placed the lid on the shoebox. "I'm keeping them because they happened." He was 16 and already understood something I was still learning, that memory and mercy are not the same thing. You can hold a moment without holding the person who was in it. You can keep a photograph without keeping the door open. You want the story where I celebrate? Where I toast to her ruin and sleep like a king? That is not this story. This story is a man sitting across from his son in a quiet kitchen, watching him sort through the wreckage with hands that do not shake, and realizing the boy became someone I had not yet managed to be. The next morning I opened the shop early. The air was still cool, that brief window before the Arizona heat claims everything, and the brass fixtures on the display cases caught the first light like small fires. I sat at the workbench and opened a 1943 Hamilton pocket watch, the kind built for wartime, reliable, no nonsense, made to survive rough handling. This one had not been serviced in decades. The balance wheel was bent. The mainspring had torqued unevenly. The dial was clean, but beneath it, every moving part carried the memory of a fall that no one had bothered to repair. I worked slowly. Tweezers, loop, the small satisfactions of alignment. I thought about Lorraine. Not the version who stood in the courtroom, not the version in the hallway with mascara on her cheeks. The version before Vance. The version who burned a birthday cake and laughed about it. The version who sat on the porch steps looking at something in the distance. She tried to take everything I had, but the man she trusted to help her do it was planning to take everything she had too. That is not irony. That is arithmetic. Two predators circling the same table, and the one who moved first happened to be wearing a suit I paid for. Hatred is a mainspring wound too tight. It runs hot and fast, and then it snaps. And you are left holding a machine that cannot tell time anymore. I did not pity her. But I stopped hating her somewhere between the second gear and the third, and I could not tell you exactly when. The Hamilton's balance wheel had been bent for 80 years. I straightened it in 40 minutes. Some things just need someone to finally sit down and pay attention. The bell rang at 3:15. Kieran walked in with his backpack over one shoulder, the way he had walked into this shop 1,000 times after school. He set his bag on the floor and leaned against the counter, watching me work without speaking. The clock on the wall ticked. The loop magnified the tiny screws. My son stood in my shop and watched me work. And that was the whole victory, not the money. Not the court order, not the arrest, just that. "What's that one?" he asked after a while. "A 1943 Hamilton," I said. "It ran perfectly for 30 years, then someone dropped it and never brought it in. By the time I got it, the damage had been sitting so long it felt permanent." Kieran was quiet for a moment. He knew I was not talking about the watch. He knew I knew he knew. That is how fathers and sons speak when the real words are too heavy. They talk about something small and let the weight carry itself. "Could you fix it?" he asked. "This one, yes," I said. I held the Hamilton up to the light. The balance wheel turned freely now, catching the afternoon sun through the window. Your mother was another machine that finally stopped running the way it was built to. I don't know if someone dropped her or if she jumped, but I know I can't fix that one. Kieran nodded. He reached behind the counter for his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," he said. "For the judge, for anyone, I don't know. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who wouldn't interrupt." He unfolded it, and I saw my son's handwriting fill the page from margin to margin. Kieran held the paper with both hands. His voice was steady at first, the way a new mainspring holds tension before the first full rotation. Then it found its rhythm. "I used to think you were quiet because you didn't have anything to say," he read. "Now I know you were quiet because you were holding everything together and didn't want me to hear the strain." I sat on the stool across from him and did not move. The shop was closed. The late afternoon light came through the front window in a long gold rectangle that touched the edge of the workbench and stopped. "You never asked me to be brave," he continued. "I did it because you showed me what it looked like every single day without calling it that. You showed me, in the way you opened the shop at 7 and closed it at 6 and never complained. In the way you ate dinner across from a woman who was planning to destroy you and still asked her how her day was." He paused. He folded the bottom corner of the page, then unfolded it. A nervous habit I recognized because it was mine. "I didn't fight for you because you told me to. I fought for you because you were the only person in my life who never asked me to pick a side." And that made the side obvious. He lowered the paper. He did not look at me. He looked at the workbench, at the tools laid out in their places, at the Hamilton pocket watch sitting on the felt pad with its case back open. My 16-year-old son had just explained me to myself better than I ever could, and he did it on a single sheet of notebook paper. I did not trust my voice. So I did what I do. I reached beneath the workbench and pulled out a wooden box I had kept in the bottom drawer for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. I set it on the bench between us, the same bench where I had repaired 10,000 watches and never once told my son what paid for it. "Open it," I said. Kieran lifted the lid. Inside were 3 documents. The original patent filing, yellowed at the edges, dated 45 years ago. The blind trust agreement, with its notary seals and legal boilerplate. And a 3rd document, newer, a trust instrument established in Kieran's name, fully funded, fully protected, signed by Boyd the previous week. "This is what they were after," I said. "A safe lock mechanism I designed when I was 20. I filed the patent before I ever opened this shop. A manufacturer licensed it, and the royalties went into a blind trust. $22 million. And now a new trust, in your name, where nobody can touch it." Kieran stared at the numbers on the trust document. He turned the page. He turned it back. He set it down on the felt pad next to the Hamilton and looked at me the way you look at someone you thought you knew. 45 years, he said. You kept a secret for 45 years. Why? Because money that people can see becomes money that people want, and I wanted you to grow up knowing the value of work, not the weight of wealth. If you have listened this long, you already know. The money was never the point. The point was making sure the people who mattered never had to think about it. The point was a shop that opened at 7, and a father who came home smelling like machine oil, and a boy who learned that a man's worth is measured by what he builds, not what he holds. Kieran was quiet for a long time. He touched the edge of the patent document the way I touch a fragile movement carefully, as if it might not survive rough handling. "Do you think if he'd never showed up," he said, "we'd still be a family?" I picked up the Hamilton from the felt pad. I held it to the light. The balance wheel I had straightened that morning turned freely, catching the sun in small, bright flashes. "We are still a family," I said, "a smaller one, but the gears that matter are still turning." Every watch I have ever repaired taught me the same lesson. The parts that last longest are the ones nobody sees, the jewels buried inside the movement. The spring coiled in the dark, the pivot turning in silence, year after year, keeping time for someone who never thinks to look. "A good watch doesn't need anyone to see it running," I said. I wound the crown 2 careful turns. The Hamilton ticked to life in my palm. "It just needs to be right when someone needs it most." Kieran looked at the watch. He looked at the wooden box. He looked at me. Then he closed the lid, set the box on the shelf behind the counter next to the bourbon Murray had brought, and reached across the workbench for a loop. "Show me how this one works," he said, pointing at the Hamilton. And so I did. The way my father showed me, 1 gear at a time. The afternoon light moved slowly across the workbench while my son leaned in and I named each part: the barrel, the train, the escapement, the balance. He listened the way I listen to a movement when I am checking for truth. With his whole attention, with nothing else in the room. Outside, the Scottsdale sun dropped behind the roofline. Inside, a father taught his son how a watch works, and that was enough. I spent 45 years building something in silence, and I nearly lost it all because I trusted the wrong person with the one thing silence couldn't protect: my family. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait until someone is already dismantling your life to pay attention to the cracks. The signs were there for months. I just didn't want to read them. This family drama taught me that revenge is not a fire you start, it is a record you keep. Every document, every date, every detail. A dad's true revenge is not destruction, it is proof. And patience, and showing your son that a man can be quiet and still be dangerous when it matters. That is the life story I want him to carry, not the money, not the court. The lesson that truth, held long enough, becomes its own justice. If this moved you, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have confronted her sooner Or played it the way I did. Share this with someone going through their own family drama. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss another one of these revenge stories. Thank you for staying until the very end. That means more to me than you know. This storytelling experience includes some fictional details added for emotional depth, but the heart of this dad's true revenge. The lesson and the love behind it, that part is as real as it gets. God bless you all.